Hi there and welcome to Hearthside. My name's Michelle. I'm the author on this blog, and I'm currently going through old blog posts, making a audio video copy for accessibility reasons. And this is the one that I really was hoping to get to today. Today is Canada Day 2022. And I wrote a blog entry last year at the beginning of June. And it's called A Heathen's Perspective on Cultural Genocide in Canada. So, trigger warnings to anyone. I mean, there's a lot of sensitive content in here. We're talking about the residential schools and different things that might be upsetting. So if you don't want to hear about that, now would be the time for you to click out of this one. Alright, I think I've given everyone enough time. So this one, it's going to be a difficult one, and this was written just after the first 215 graves were found at the residential school in Kamloops. I said at the time, I wish I could say I expressed shock at that number, but I did not. But perhaps that's a mark that I have some understanding on this topic. I think the people expressing shock are largely those who just don't know a lot about the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada. And to be honest, it's very applicable to the treatment of Indigenous people around the world, not just Canadians. I was looking up to see if I could find the exact number that has been found since then, and I couldn't find the exact number, but we're getting very close to 2,000 now, and it's not getting media coverage anymore. Most of what I'm seeing is on social media, Indigenous communities and their allies who are trying to keep this message alive so that we're actually hearing it. And today being a particularly pertinent day because we're celebrating the creation of Canada as a country, but do we really have that right? There were people here before Canada was formed, and by celebrating the creation of a country at the expense of those people who were already living there, I'm not sure if that's something that we should be celebrating. Perhaps we need to have a different day. And the other thing that was really bothering me this week is we have Indigenous Peoples Day on June the 21st, and this year they've been talking about Indigenous History Month as the entire month of June. So it's like we talk about Indigenous History Month, but then it ends on July 1st with the creation of Canada. And it just seems incredibly ironic and not right. Like, it doesn't sit right with me. And I've seen a similar parallel with Pride Month being in June as well. And I just saw a meme this morning about on July 1st how all the companies would take their rainbow stuff off and go back to catering to straight people, basically. It's just I know we need to have these days and these months to start dialogue, but this particular one, that it ends on July 1st like there's some kind of weird symbolism there that I am struggling with. So I'm going to go back to looking at what I wrote last year and see if I can present it and add to it as necessary. So I said there's so many layers to this politically and also personally for me, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who can relate to that feeling in some way or another. I've been very privileged in my life to befriend and learn from a number of people who are Indigenous to the land that's now referred to as Canada. And I'm using the word Indigenous to refer to First Nations people, Métis, and Inuit people within Canada. Indigenous issues are very near and dear to my heart. When I look at political platforms at election time, one of the things I'm looking for is what they will do for Indigenous people. And all of this just hits a lot closer to home for me as well, because I've been so close to these issues, so close to people who've been personally affected. And I want to add here that in the last 3 months, I've been working for a literacy organization, and my primary role has been truth and reconciliation programs with a literacy component. I'm working right on the ground level, teaching people about Indigenous history, about Indigenous culture, and about all the cultural genocide that occurred through the residential schools and other government programs and religious programs that were designed to eliminate Indigenous people. So I'm teaching teenagers primarily about these issues, and many of them don't know, but I'm also there with Indigenous people and presenting this to them and trying to find the appropriate way to do that. And I've been sharing so much space with them, learning so much from all of them. And really the only way I can do it is every class that I have with them, every program that I have with them, it's a discussion. It's not me telling them how things are. I present the facts that I have, but we're having a discussion. They're always welcome to have their input, and I welcome their input, and their input affects where we go with that conversation. So a lot of my youth that I'm working with are Indigenous. Others are immigrants who don't know much about our history, and just there's such a diverse mix of people that I've been working with, Canadians of all walks of life. And this program is brand new this year. I've worked with Indigenous people to try to create it. The first person who was working on it was an Indigenous woman, and I had to step up from when she had to leave the role. But I've been partnered with my coworker who's also an Indigenous person. And just every day is a challenge, and every day I'm learning, and having those conversations is really difficult. And I'm often exhausted when I've finished having my program for the day, because there's just so much going on, so much to unpack, so many people who need to be heard. We have the discussion, and then the students in the programs are relating it to their own lives, and then my coworkers relating it to their own lives, and there's just so many levels of processing and so much work that needs to be done. And there's a lot of people who don't realize, I think, exactly how much work needs to be done and how devastating history has been in Canada for Indigenous people. And they're also not aware of all the challenges that Indigenous people face even today. Like not having access to clean drinking water. Until 2021 in Winnipeg, like we've been getting our water from Shoal Lake, and right where the water intake is the First Nations Shoal Lake 40. And up until 2001, the Shoal Lake 40 Indigenous people were not getting clean water, even though Winnipeg was getting clean water from their lake. And the reason why was they didn't have a water treatment facility there at Shoal Lake. So we were just stealing their water, and they had nothing clean to drink. Till 2001, that's 23 years without clean drinking water, and this is not an uncommon story. So, on a personal level, I grew up with my family thinking that we were Métis, and I didn't have any reason to question the story. Why would we make up a story like that? It wouldn't be beneficial to my family. I didn't think for them to create a story like that, so I had no reason to really question it. I never asked for any free handouts because I knew there was people who were more deserving of them than me, that I had been really lucky with my life and the way that things were. But there was always this story from my mom about how some of our relatives had been Métis, and how my mom and her brothers and sisters were told not to say that they were Métis at school because they would be treated different. And I mean, all of us looked Caucasian, so that wasn't a problem as long as you didn't say anything. And when I was young, my mom and some of my aunts wanted to reclaim that heritage basically for us. So I attended a lot of Indigenous events growing up because of that belief that my mother and my aunts had about us being Métis. As an adult, I tried to search out that part of my heritage and kept coming on dead ends in genealogy research. Eventually, my husband bought me a DNA test, and it's come back that there's no Indigenous blood, and the same with my grandmother. She took a DNA test, and it also showed that there was no Indigenous blood. So my standing theory on it is that one of our relatives was, when I looked at the genealogy, he was a police chief, and I think he had a child out of wedlock, and the story was perhaps that he and his wife adopted this child, and they said that this child was Indigenous just to cover up an affair, I think. But it seems like a pretty wild story just to cover up an affair, but it's hard to understand how people saw things in history, like the things that they do that we wouldn't do now. So yeah, I grew up immersed in Indigenous culture in a lot of ways because of the belief of my family that we were part Métis. So as a result, I've always been aware of Indigenous issues, and later on, I got my teaching degree. I worked up north on a reserve, and I've met a lifelong friend, and she wants to adopt us as her children, and she's a woman from a Cree community in Alberta, and I think that experience, it's been life-changing for me in so many ways. So that's where I'm coming from with this. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we have to recognize our history in the same way that we have to recognize the history of where heathenry came from, and that heathenry in modern times has very racist roots. The same is true about the history of how Canada was formed. It was formed on racist roots, and this makes this a heathen issue, and it makes it a Canadian issue, and I don't think we can separate ourselves from it. Heathens in Canada need to be working towards truth and reconciliation, just as all Canadians need to be working towards truth and reconciliation. There's the first step to really helping with this is educating yourself on the issues, and it takes time. It's a lifetime of work. It's multiple lifetimes of work, honestly. You can't stop learning, just the same as in heathenry, you can't stop learning. If you've stagnated in your learning, then you're doing something wrong. So yeah, that's my story, basically. But we need to be allies. Heathenry's a minority religion in Canada. But a lot of heathens in Canada still hold a lot of privilege, and even if you don't, supporting other minority groups, if you want your minority group to be supported and recognized, then you need to support other minority groups as well. It's all of our fight. We really have so much in common with Indigenous people. We're trying to reclaim our lost traditions. We're trying to become more in touch with our ancestors. It came about in a different way for heathens in many ways than it did for Indigenous people. But we have all these things in common. And we understand what it's like to have erasure of our beliefs. So we really have a good place to stand on in order to build a relationship with Indigenous people and to support them and to be good allies. So I'm not shocked that we found 215 children. I'm not shocked that we found almost 2,000 children. I wish that I could be, because that's a lot of pain that we have to work through collectively as Canadians. But we need to be standing in support with the parents, the grandparents of these kids, and also with the survivors and their children and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, because this has been going on for generations. I don't know how much you know about Orange Shirt Day and Phyllis Webstad, who was the woman who inspired Orange Shirt Day. But that was 7 generations almost in her family of either residential schools or the effects of residential schools, the erasure of culture, the erasure of language, and all the pain of that. Pain of all the abuse that occurred in those schools and abuse that occurred because of those schools. Alcohol and drug addiction and all sorts of things that are caused by the trauma of that experience. We as a nation need to take responsibility for this. We took away the childhood of these people. We stripped it away from them so that we could erase their culture. We cut their hair. We didn't allow them to wear their own clothing or speak their language. That's why we need to be allies. And we need to be good stewards of the land and be allies to the Indigenous people. There's something in university. I was in this Canadian poetry class, and there was a woman in residence at the university, the resident poet, who was an Indigenous woman. And she came in to give us a talk one day. And she said that the European colonists are like white ghosts on the Canadian landscape because the bones of their ancestors are not under their feet. They're disconnected from the land. And that moved me at the time, and I still think about it. I come back to it all the time. I went searching for those bones. I had to find the bones of my ancestors in a metaphorical sense, but also in a physical sense. I had to find my connection to this land. And now I think about it again, the Indigenous people have their own bones that they have found. So many bones. And not all of the bones of all of those children have been found yet. And children shouldn't have to die before their parents. This is not the bones that Canada wants to build itself upon. We need to make peace with the dead. And that means that we need to make peace with the living. We have to expose the dark truth of our shared history. And we need to listen to the stories of the dead. The stories that were hidden about how Canada was formed. And Canada needs to grieve, not just Indigenous people, all of us. This is the legacy of every Canadian. We need to find those bones and we need to have them laid to rest. We've done so much work in this last year, but there's still so much work that needs to be done. And this is the same across the world. The same for the Native Americans in the United States, the Aborigines of Australia, and the Indigenous Sami people. They need allies. We need to ally with the Indigenous people. We need to respect the land. We need to listen to their words. And we need to treat them with respect and equality and equity. So I think that's what's important. Cultural genocide can't be swept under the rug. And this is a heathen issue. And heathens need to be good allies. We have a good platform for talking about these things, for working towards reconciliation. We have so many ways of relating that could help us to be good allies with the Indigenous people. There's so much that is worth reading, educating yourself on this. I have links to the 94 calls to action and different material on how to be a good ally, and those will all be included down below in the description. Alright, I think this will be my last one for today, because it's a lot of energy to do that one, just the same it is a lot of energy to do my programs, and a lot to process, so take some time for yourself and reflect on my words and reflect on your own experiences. Do some reading, but take time, because everyone needs time to process this. Until next time.